I'm Melva 32, and I've always believed success is the sweetest revenge against those who never believed in you. Growing up with a mother who constantly criticized my choices taught me to build my life on my own terms. Last Christmas, she publicly humiliated me, calling me a freeloader in front of our entire family. What she didn't know was that the magnificent house where she hosted her perfect family Christmas, I owned it. Before I share how her face dropped when she discovered the truth, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey of sweet vindication. My childhood memories are colored by my mother Patricia's constant disapproval. Our middle-class home in suburban Pennsylvania looked perfect from the outside, but inside it was a battlefield of expectations. Patricia believed appearances were everything. She spent hours making sure our home looked like it belonged in a magazine spread. Our clothes were always pristine, and holiday gatherings were events worthy of social media before social media even existed. Melva, fix your posture. No one respects a woman who slouches, she would snap at family dinners. Melva, why can't you be more like your cousin Jennifer? She's already on the honor roll. These comments formed the soundtrack of my youth playing on repeat until they became the voice in my head. My father Thomas wasn't much better. While not actively critical, his silence when my mother tore into me was its own kind of betrayal. Occasionally, when Patricia wasn't around, he would offer quiet words of encouragement. "Your science project looks great, kiddo," he once whispered, squeezing my shoulder before quickly changing the subject when my mother walked in. These rare moments only highlighted how little support I received when it actually mattered in the moments my mother was actively tearing down my confidence. Then there was my brother Andrew, 3 years older, and the golden child of the family. He followed the traditional path my parents approved of going to the right college, studying the right subject, dating the right kind of girls. Each of his achievements was celebrated extravagantly, while mine were barely acknowledged. Andrew got accepted to Penn State with a scholarship my mother would announce to everyone at church, at the grocery store, to waiters at restaurants. When I received a scholarship to study finance at a smaller but well-respected school, my mother merely said, "Well, at least it's not community college." Even as a child, I was drawn to business and entrepreneurship. I started a small neighborhood pet sitting service when I was 12. While other parents praised their children's initiative, my mother called it playing pretend and insisted I focus on more serious pursuits that would lead to a real career like medicine or law. "Melva, this little business game is cute, but it's time to focus on your studies if you want to get into a good law school," she said, despite my repeated insistence that I had no interest in becoming a lawyer. When I chose to study finance in college instead of following her predetermined path to law school, the divide between us widened. Every holiday break became an exercise in endurance as she questioned my choices. "Finance. What kind of respectable career will you have with that?" she would ask over Thanksgiving turkey. "Law is stable. Law is respectable. This business fascination is just a phase." My father would stare at his plate. Andrew would change the subject, and I would swallow both my food and my retorts. After graduation, I limited my contact with my family. Christmas visits became shorter, phone calls less frequent. I still maintained ties because despite everything they were family, but I created boundaries for my own peace. "Sorry, I can't make it for the whole week. Work is really busy," became my standard response to invitations. What my family didn't know during those years of limited contact was that I was building something substantial, something that would eventually force my mother to see me as I truly was, not as the failure she had decided I would become. But that revelation would have to wait until I was ready, until the pieces were perfectly in place for a moment she would never forget. My journey into real estate began immediately after college when I landed a job at Cornerstone Properties, a small firm in Philadelphia. The position wasn't prestigious enough for my mother to brag about at her social clubs, but it gave me something more valuable than status. It gave me knowledge. "You'll be assisting with administrative tasks, showing properties occasionally, and learning the business from the ground up," my manager explained on my first day. I absorbed everything like a sponge, staying late to review contracts, asking questions about zoning regulations, and volunteering for every open house. 6 months in, I caught the attention of Sophia Martinez, one of the firm's top agents. "You have good instincts," she told me, after watching me successfully negotiate a tricky sale. "Most people your age are just looking for a paycheck, but you're actually paying attention to the mechanics of this business." Sophia became my mentor, taking me under her wing and teaching me aspects of real estate investment that weren't covered in any college course. She had built her own portfolio from nothing and showed me how to do the same. "Start small, live frugally, and reinvest everything," she advised. "Most people want to look successful before they actually are. That's the trap." Following her advice, I lived in a tiny studio apartment and saved everything I could. 2 years after starting at Cornerstone, I had enough for a down payment on my first investment property, a small duplex in an up-and-coming neighborhood. That first investment barely succeeded. The inspection missed water damage that cost thousands to repair, and finding reliable tenants proved harder than expected. There were nights I sat on the bare floor of my empty apartment, spreadsheets spread around me, wondering if my mother had been right all along. "You're not cut out for this business world," her voice would echo in my head during those dark moments. But I persisted. The duplex eventually started generating positive cash flow. I reinvested and purchased a second property, 18 months later, then a third a year after that. Each investment taught me something new. Each mistake made me sharper, more strategic. By my 29th birthday, I had a modest portfolio of 6 properties and had quit my job at Cornerstone to manage my investments full-time. Sophia continued to mentor me now more as a colleague than a superior. "You're ready for something bigger," she told me over coffee one morning. "You've proven you can handle the basics. Now it's time to look for an opportunity that can truly change your life." That opportunity came in the form of an email from a historical property listing service I subscribed to. The subject line read simply, "Weston Manor Estate Foreclosure Auction." I opened it out of curiosity, not expecting anything significant, but the photos made my heart stop. The estate was a historic mansion, built in the 1920s, once grand, but now in significant disrepair. It sat on 5 acres just outside the city, with potential for development or restoration. The minimum bid was high, but not unreasonable given the property's size and location. Something about the house called to me. I printed the listing and took it to my next meeting with Sophia. "This is ambitious," she said, studying the details. "The restoration costs will be substantial. But if you can pull it off, this could be your defining project." What I didn't tell Sophia immediately was the strange feeling of familiarity I had looking at the photos. It wasn't until I drove out to see the property in person that I understood why. Standing in the overgrown driveway staring up at the weathered facade, a childhood memory surfaced. I was maybe 5 or 6, holding my grandfather's hand as he pointed to a grand house on a hill. "That's where your mom grew up," he had said. "Your grandma and I bought it when we were young, fixed it up ourselves. Beautiful place. Shame we had to sell it when the business went under." I had forgotten that conversation until that moment. A quick search confirmed my suspicion. This was indeed my grandparents' former home, the place where my mother had spent her childhood, the place she had often spoken about with a mixture of nostalgia and bitterness. "We had real class back then," she would say during her criticisms of my life choices. "We knew what it meant to have standards to live well." The coincidence seemed too perfect to ignore. I spent the next week researching the property's history, confirming it had indeed been owned by my grandparents from 1970 to 1986 when financial troubles forced them to sell. My mother would have been a teenager when they moved out. The decision to purchase Weston Manor wasn't just business, it became personal. This wasn't just any investment property. This was reclaiming a piece of family history, but on my terms. It was also a chance to prove in the most tangible way possible that I had succeeded despite my mother's constant predictions of my failure. I created an LLC to make the purchase, keeping my name off any public records. The auction was competitive, but my careful preparation and research allowed me to secure the property without overshooting my budget. The day I received the keys, I stood alone in the grand dusty foyer and felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything before. The renovation process was the most challenging project of my life. The mansion needed everything from a new roof to updated electrical systems, from plumbing overhauls to structural repairs. I hired the best contractors I could afford and worked alongside them whenever possible, learning about historical restoration techniques and architectural preservation. Every decision from paint colors to fixture selections became an exercise in imagining how the house could honor its past while embracing a new future. I researched the original floor plans and design elements, even tracking down photographs of the interior from my grandparents' time through distant relatives who didn't speak to my mother. The financial investment was substantial, pushing my resources to their limits. There were moments when I questioned the entire endeavor, when unexpected costs or delays threatened to derail the project. But each time I stood in the gradually transforming space, I found the determination to continue. 18 months after beginning renovations, Weston Manor was transformed. The exterior had been restored to its original grandeur, while the interior blended historical elements with modern conveniences. I furnished it with carefully selected pieces that reflected the home's character while providing comfort. To maintain my privacy, I hired a property management company to handle the estate, presenting it as an exclusive venue for events and short-term rentals. My name appeared nowhere in the marketing materials or public information. As far as anyone knew, Weston Manor belonged to a private investment group. The renovation had consumed so much of my time and energy that I had barely spoken to my family during the process. They knew only that I was busy with work, a vague explanation that my mother typically met with dismissive comments about my little real estate hobby. The stage was set, though I didn't yet know for what. The house that had once belonged to my grandparents, that had shaped my mother's childhood, was now mine, transformed by my vision and hard work. It was a physical manifestation of everything I had achieved, a success so concrete that even my mother wouldn't be able to diminish it once she knew. The call from my mother came on a crisp November morning, nearly 2 years since I'd last attended a family Christmas gathering. "Melva, it's your mother," she said, as if I wouldn't recognize the voice that had criticized me for 3 decades. "Hi, Mom," I replied, steeling myself for whatever reason she'd called. "We're doing Christmas differently this year," she announced, her voice carrying that tone of forced brightness she used when particularly pleased with herself. "I found the most spectacular venue. Everyone's coming, the whole family. It's going to be very special." My first instinct was to make an excuse. The previous Christmas had been a particularly painful experience, with my mother spending the entire day comparing my cousin's new engagement to my single status and my brother's promotion to my mysterious career. "I'm not sure if I can make it." I began reaching for my standard excuses about work commitments. "Nonsense," she cut in. "This is important, Melva. I want to show everyone something they'll never forget. You can clear your schedule for one day." There was something in her voice, a certainty, almost a smugness, that made me curious despite myself. "What venue?" I asked, trying to sound merely polite rather than interested. "It's a surprise," she replied, clearly pleased to have information to withhold. "But I'll tell you this much, it's a historic mansion that's recently been renovated. Very exclusive. You'll be impressed even with your property experience." A chill ran down my spine as a suspicion began to form. "How did you find this place?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "I have connections," she said vaguely. "The important thing is that you'll be there. Christmas Eve through Christmas Day. Bring an overnight bag, there's plenty of room for everyone to stay over." After extracting my promise to attend, she ended the call with her usual abruptness. I sat staring at my phone, mind racing. It couldn't be. The coincidence would be too extraordinary. And yet the timing, the description, the unusual insistence all pointed to one incredible possibility. Somehow my mother had arranged to host Christmas at Weston Manor at my property. A quick call to Marcus at the property management company confirmed my suspicion. "Yes, Ms. Harper, we did book a Patricia Johnson for Christmas Eve and Day," he said, checking the records. "She mentioned it was a family gathering. I didn't realize she was related to you." "We're not close," I replied, mind still reeling. "She has no idea I own the property." There was a pause before Marcus asked, "Would you like us to cancel the booking?" I considered this for a long moment. The simplest option would be to stop this now to prevent the awkward situation entirely. But another part of me, the part that had endured decades of dismissal and criticism, saw an opportunity. No, I finally decided. Let the booking stand, but please don't mention my ownership to her or anyone in my family. I'd like to handle that disclosure myself if necessary. After ending the call, I sat contemplating the strange twist of fate that had led to this situation. My mother unwittingly planning to host her perfect family Christmas in the house that I owned, the house that represented everything she thought I couldn't achieve. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of preparation. Despite my complicated feelings about the gathering, I took care selecting thoughtful gifts for everyone. For my father, a first edition of his favorite mystery novel. For Andrew, a set of artisanal cooking tools for his new hobby. For his fiancée Jessica, whom I'd only met briefly but seemed genuinely kind, a handcrafted scarf from a local artist. For my mother, an antique brooch similar to one my grandmother had owned, a subtle connection to Weston Manor, that only I would understand the significance of. As Christmas Eve approached, my anxiety grew. I packed carefully for the overnight stay, including a special outfit for Christmas Day, that made me feel confident and successful armor for what I anticipated would be a challenging interaction. The drive to Weston Manor on Christmas Eve morning was surreal, approaching as a guest, the property that I had poured so much of myself into. When I turned onto the long driveway, the house came into view, decorated for Christmas with tasteful lights outlining its grand architecture. A large wreath hung on the front door, and glimpses of a tall tree were visible through the bay windows. My mother had clearly gone all out with the decorations, adding to the ones the management company had already installed at my request. I parked behind several cars already in the circular drive and sat for a moment, gathering my courage. This was my house. Every nail, every paint color, every piece of furniture had been chosen by me. Yet I was arriving as if I were just another guest about to spend Christmas with a family that had no idea of my success and the physical manifestation of that very success. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my overnight bag and the gifts from the back seat. As I approached the grand entrance, I reminded myself that I had nothing to prove to anyone. My achievements spoke for themselves, whether my family recognized them or not. Still, I couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation at the thought of the moment when they would finally see the truth. I rang the doorbell to my own home and waited, wondering who would open the door to welcome me into a house that already belonged to me. The door swung open to reveal my mother, dressed in an elegant red dress with a string of pearls that I recognized as my grandmother's. Her face showed the briefest flicker of disappointment upon seeing me, quickly masked with a hostess smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Melva, you made it," she said, her tone suggesting she had half expected me to cancel. "Come in, everyone's already here." I stepped into the grand foyer of Weston Manor, taking in the transformation. The management company had decorated beautifully for the holidays, with garlands draped along the curved staircase, the scent of pine and cinnamon in the air, and soft classical music playing through the whole house sound system I had installed during renovations. My mother misinterpreted my appreciation as awe. "Impressive, isn't it?" she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "I knew you'd be surprised. This is what real success looks like, Melva." I bit back a response, reminding myself that the revelation would come in its own time. Instead, I simply nodded and handed her my overnight bag. "I'll show you to your room," she said. "I've put you in one of the smaller bedrooms on the third floor. The nicer suites are for Andrew and Jessica, and of course your aunt and uncle who actually contributed to renting this place." The barb was delivered with such casual cruelty that it took me a moment to process. I followed her up the familiar stairs past the second floor to the third, where she opened the door to what I knew was actually one of the most charming rooms in the house, with a window seat overlooking the gardens and original crown molding I had painstakingly restored. "Dinner is at 7, don't be late," she said, closing the door before I could respond. Alone in the room, I ran my hand over the vintage dresser I had personally refinished, feeling the bizarre disconnection of being treated as a guest in my own home. After freshening up, I made my way downstairs to join the gathering. The great room was filled with family members I hadn't seen in over a year. My father stood awkwardly by the fireplace, nursing a scotch. Andrew and his fiancée Jessica were chatting with our cousins near the Christmas tree. Aunts, uncles, and a few family friends milled about, admiring the house. "This place is something else," my father said when I approached him. "Your mother won't say how she managed to book it. Must have cost a fortune." "It's beautiful," I agreed, wondering what he would think when he learned the truth. My father had never been actively cruel like my mother, just passively complicit in her treatment of me. Andrew spotted me and waved me over to where he stood with Jessica, a petite woman with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Melva, great to see you," he said, giving me a brief, awkward hug. "You remember Jessica from Thanksgiving last year?" "Of course!" I smiled, genuinely pleased to see her again. At our brief previous meeting, she had been the only one to ask thoughtful questions about my work rather than dismissing it. "Your mom says you work in real estate," Jessica asked. "This place must be right up your alley then. The restoration work is incredible." "It is." I agreed, touched by her interest and amused by how right she was. The attention to historical detail while incorporating modern amenities shows real vision. "Listen to you sounding all professional," Andrew teased, but without the edge my mother's similar comments would have carried. As we chatted, I observed my mother moving through the room like a queen at court, accepting compliments on her choice of venue, taking credit for every beautiful detail of the house. "The moldings are original," she informed my Aunt Linda, as if she had personally overseen their restoration, rather than me having spent weeks researching historically accurate techniques. "I selected this property specifically because it reminds me of our old family home," she told another relative, coming dangerously close to the truth without realizing it. Throughout the evening, I helped in the kitchen, knowing exactly where everything was stored while pretending to search for items. I answered the door for catering staff I had personally hired through the management company, who gave no indication they recognized me as the owner. I poured wine from my own collection selected during trips to vineyards specifically for the house. During a quiet moment, I slipped away to my favorite room in the mansion, a small library I had filled with first editions and comfortable reading chairs. This was the space most personal to me, designed as a retreat from the world. Standing there surrounded by books I had chosen in a house I owned, while my family remained oblivious downstairs, brought a complex mixture of emotions, pride in what I had built, sadness for the recognition I still sought from my family, and anticipation for what would happen when the truth emerged. "There you are," came Jessica's voice from the doorway. "Your mom's looking for help with the dessert trays." I nodded, taking one last look around my sanctuary before returning to the performance of being a guest in my own home. Christmas morning dawned, bright and clear sunlight streaming through the windows of Weston Manor and illuminating the fresh dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. I woke early, having slept fitfully in my own guest room, and made my way downstairs before anyone else was stirring. In the quiet kitchen, I prepared coffee using the commercial-grade machine I had installed during renovations. Standing at the bay window overlooking the grounds, cradling my mug between my hands, I contemplated the day ahead. Christmas dinner would be the main event, the moment when everyone gathered together, when my mother would be at her most performative, and when the revelation of my ownership would have maximum impact if it came to that. Gradually, the house came to life around me. Family members wandered down in pajamas and robes, exclaiming over the beautifully decorated tree and the stockings that had mysteriously been filled overnight, another touch arranged by the management company at my standing instruction for holiday rentals. My mother appeared last, already fully dressed, and made up surveying her domain with satisfaction. She distributed coffee and breakfast pastries as if she were the lady of the manor, directing people to various activities planned for the day. "We'll open gifts at 11, she announced. "Then Christmas dinner will be served at 2. The catering staff will arrive at noon." The morning passed in a blur of forced festivity. Children tore through wrapping paper, while adults exchanged gifts with varying degrees of enthusiasm. I received the usual assortment of impersonal presents from most relatives, scented candles, and generic scarves from people who didn't know me well enough to select something meaningful. My father gave me a gift card. Andrew and Jessica surprised me with a beautiful leather portfolio they had noticed me admiring in a shop window during our last meeting. My mother's gift to me was a self-help book titled "Finding Your Career Path After 30, an offering so pointed in its criticism that several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I thought you might find it useful," she said with a thin smile, "since you're still figuring things out." I thanked her politely, adding the book to the stack beside me, while ignoring the implied criticism. When she opened my gift, the antique brooch, she examined it with a puzzled expression. "This looks familiar," she said, turning it over in her hands. "It reminded me of one Grandma used to wear," I explained, watching recognition dawn in her eyes. For a brief moment, something like genuine emotion crossed her face before the polished hostess mask returned. "How thoughtful," she said, setting it aside without putting it on. By 2 o'clock, the formal dining room was set for Christmas dinner. The long table gleamed with fine china and crystal that I had selected for the house centerpieces of pine and holly running down its length. The catering staff moved efficiently around us, serving the gourmet meal my mother had ordered, but that I was ultimately paying for through my management company. Seating had been carefully arranged by my mother, with herself at the head of the table, my father at the foot, and important family members given prominent positions. I found my name card placed at the far end next to the kitchen door, a not-so-subtle indication of my status in the family hierarchy. As the main course was served, my father stood to offer a toast, raising his glass of the expensive wine I had stocked in the cellar. "I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate Christmas together," he began. "And special thanks to Patricia for finding this incredible venue for our family gathering." My mother preened under the acknowledgement, then stood herself, effectively cutting off my father's toast before he was finished. "I wanted this Christmas to be special," she said, looking around the table, "to celebrate all the wonderful achievements in our family this year." What followed was essentially a roll call of family accomplishments, each one detailed and praised. Andrew's promotion to senior manager, Cousin Taylor's engagement to a surgeon, Aunt Linda's community service award, Uncle Robert's successful medical procedure. Conspicuously absent was any mention of me or my life. It was as if I existed only as a physical presence at the table, not as a person with a career or achievements worth acknowledging. A few uncomfortable glances were directed my way, as the omission became obvious, but no one interrupted my mother's recitation. When she finally finished, conversation resumed with a slightly strained quality, relatives making deliberate efforts to include me. "So, Melva, what have you been up to lately?" my Aunt Linda asked kindly. "Still working in real estate?" Before I could answer, my mother interjected, "Melva's still figuring things out. Aren't you, dear, jumping from one thing to another, never quite finding her footing?" The dismissal stung, despite years of similar comments. I opened my mouth to correct her, to finally set the record straight about my success, when she continued, her voice carrying clearly across the table. "I sometimes wonder if she'll ever settle into a real career. The rest of you are so established, so successful. Poor Melva is still playing at being a businesswoman, while the rest of you are actually building lives." A hush fell over the table. Even those used to my mother's critical nature seemed taken aback by the directness of her attack. Jessica looked mortified, Andrew uncomfortable. My father stared fixedly at his plate. "I've actually been quite successful," I said quietly but firmly. "My investments have performed very well." My mother laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. "Investments, is that what you call it? Let's be honest, Melva. You couldn't even afford to contribute to renting this place for Christmas. You're basically a freeloader living on the margins while pretending to be something you're not." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. I felt heat rise to my face, a mixture of humiliation and anger, making it difficult to breathe for a moment. Around the table, relatives shifted uncomfortably, some finding sudden interest in their food, others exchanging shocked glances. In that moment, looking at my mother's smug expression, I made a decision. I had planned to keep my ownership of Weston Manor private, to avoid exactly this kind of dramatic confrontation. But her public attempt to shame me demanded a public response. "Would you excuse me for a moment?" I said calmly, placing my napkin beside my plate and rising from the table with as much dignity as I could muster. As I left the dining room, I heard murmured conversation resume behind me, no doubt discussing my mother's unusually harsh comments and my abrupt departure. But I wasn't retreating in defeat. I was preparing for a revelation that would change the dynamic of our family forever. In the quiet of the entrance hall, I took several deep breaths to calm my racing heart. The humiliation of being called a freeloader in front of the entire family burned within me, but it would soon be replaced by vindication. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Marcus at the property management company, who I knew was on call for the holiday. Could you come to the house? There's a document I need to sign immediately. It's important. His response came quickly. Of course, Ms. Harper. I can be there in 15 minutes. Perfect, I replied. When you arrive, please ask for me by name in front of the other guests. With that arranged, I returned to the dining room, sliding back into my seat as dessert was being served. My mother threw me a look that combined triumph with disappointment that I hadn't stayed away longer, giving her more opportunity to discuss my shortcomings. Everything all right, dear? My Aunt Linda asked kindly. Just fine, I replied with a small smile. Just needed a moment. Conversation continued around me. The topic thankfully moved on from my supposed failings to more general family matters. I ate my dessert quietly, counting the minutes until Marcus would arrive. 15 minutes later, almost to the second the doorbell rang. My mother frowned. Who could that be? We're not expecting anyone else, she said, looking around as if someone might confess to inviting an extra guest without her permission. I'll get it, I offered, rising from my seat before she could object. I walked to the front door, aware that curious eyes followed me from the dining room. Opening it, I greeted Marcus with a warm smile. Thank you for coming on such short notice, I said deliberately, loud enough to be heard by those watching from the dining room. Of course, Ms. Harper, he replied, equally audible. I have the documents that require the owner's signature right here. I invited him in, leading him toward the dining room, where my family sat in various states of confusion. Everyone, this is Marcus from Elite Property Management, I announced as we entered. He manages Weston Manor on my behalf. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's face went from confusion to disbelief in seconds, her complexion paling visibly. What do you mean on your behalf? She finally managed, her voice uncharacteristically weak. I said clearly, meeting her eyes directly, that I own Weston Manor. I purchased it 2 years ago and oversaw its complete restoration. Every detail of this house, from the paint colors to the furniture to the books in the library, was personally selected by me. Shocked exclamations erupted around the table. My father's mouth literally fell open. Andrew stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Jessica's face broke into a genuine smile of delight. That's not possible, my mother said, finding her voice. This house costs millions. You couldn't possibly afford something like this. I've built a very successful real estate investment portfolio over the past decade. I explained, not just to her, but to everyone present. Weston Manor is my largest project to date, but certainly not my only property. Why didn't you tell us? My father asked, sounding genuinely hurt. I gave him a level look. Would you have believed me? Has anyone in this family ever taken my career seriously? No one had an answer to that, least of all my parents. I need to step out with Marcus to sign some paperwork, I said into the uncomfortable silence. Please continue with dessert, we won't be long. I led Marcus to the study, where he produced the quarterly maintenance approval documents that could have easily waited until after the holidays. Once we were alone, he gave me a questioning look. Family didn't know you owned the place, he asked, handing me a pen. No, I replied, signing where indicated. My mother actually booked it through your company, not realizing it was mine. He shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. That must have been quite a moment back there. It was necessary, I said, surprising myself with the calm certainty I felt. Thank you for coming on Christmas Day. All part of the service, he assured me. Will you need anything else while I'm here? I thought for a moment. No, I believe everything is under control now. After Marcus left, I remained in the study for a few minutes, collecting my thoughts before returning to the dining room. When I entered, the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversation stopped abruptly, all eyes turning to me with new interest and from some new respect. My mother had vanished from her seat at the head of the table. She went upstairs, Andrew informed me quietly. She was pretty upset. I nodded, unsurprised. I should talk to her. Are you sure that's a good idea right now? My father asked, concern evident in his voice, though I wasn't sure whether the concern was for me or for my mother's feelings. Yes, I said firmly. This conversation is long overdue. I found my mother in the master suite, sitting rigidly on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the snow-covered grounds. She didn't turn when I entered, though she must have heard me. Was this your plan all along? She asked, her voice cold. To humiliate me in front of the entire family on Christmas Day? No, I answered truthfully. I had no idea you would book this house for Christmas. When I found out, I decided to let it happen, but I wasn't planning to reveal my ownership unless necessary. Unless necessary, she repeated, finally turning to look at me. And my calling you a freeloader made it necessary, I suppose. You couldn't just privately correct me later. The way you've privately supported me all these years, I countered, keeping my voice level. The way you've privately acknowledged my accomplishments, my hard work, my success. She flinched slightly at that. You've spent my entire life dismissing me publicly, criticizing my choices, diminishing my achievements. I continued. Today was just more of the same, except this time you did it in my house, a house that represents everything you said I would never achieve. So this is revenge, she said flatly, making me look like a fool in front of everyone. This is truth, I corrected her. For once, the family sees me as I actually am not, as the failure you've always painted me to be. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze returning to the window. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost some of its edge. Did you know this was your grandparents' house, the one I grew up in? Yes, I admitted. I discovered that after I became interested in the property, but before I purchased it. So that was part of it too, she said softly. Taking back the house my parents lost. I didn't buy it to spite you, I told her. I bought it because it was a good investment, and yes, because of the family connection. I thought you might actually be proud when you found out that you might finally see I've built something substantial. She laughed bitterly at that. Proud that my daughter has the house I lost, the home that was taken from me when my father's business failed. Suddenly, I understood something that had eluded me all these years. My mother's criticism, her dismissal of my interest in business, her constant pushing towards stable careers like law or medicine. It all stemmed from her own loss, her own pain when her family's financial stability had crumbled. This isn't the same house you lost, I said quietly. That house is gone. This is something new I've created, something that honors the history but isn't defined by it, just like I've created a life that acknowledges where I came from but isn't limited by it. She said nothing to this, her posture still rigid, her face averted. I waited a moment longer, then moved toward the door. We should rejoin the others, I suggested. It's still Christmas and they're waiting for us. You go, she said. I need a few minutes. I nodded, though she wasn't looking at me, and left her alone with her thoughts, wondering if anything would change between us after today, or if we would simply find a new dynamic in which to continue our decades-long pattern of misunderstanding and distance. By the time my mother rejoined the gathering downstairs, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Family members were exploring the house with new interest, asking me questions about the renovation process and my other real estate ventures. Jessica and Andrew were examining the library, Andrew admitting he'd never realized the extent of my business acumen. This is incredible, Melva, he said, genuine admiration in his voice. Why didn't you ever tell me about any of this? I gave him a measured look. Would you have believed me? You've always sided with Mom when she dismissed my career. He had the grace to look ashamed. I guess I just assumed she knew what she was talking about. I'm sorry for that. Jessica squeezed his arm supportively before turning to me. The restoration work is amazing. You must be so proud of what you've accomplished here. Thank you, I said, warming to her genuine interest. It was a labor of love and definitely the most challenging project I've taken on. My mother entered the room quietly, her expression carefully composed. The conversation faltered briefly before resuming, everyone watching her with varying degrees of caution. The crown molding is original, she said, after a moment, her voice carrying a strange note I couldn't quite identify. My father had it restored in the 70s. I know, I replied. I found photographs from that period and used them as reference when we had to repair sections that had been damaged. She nodded a small acknowledgement that felt significant somehow. For the rest of the afternoon, she maintained a subdued presence, neither overtly hostile nor particularly warm. She made no further reference to my ownership of the house or her earlier comments, but she also refrained from her usual criticisms. As evening approached, several relatives approached me privately to share their own stories of facing judgment and finding their path despite family expectations. "Your grandmother never thought I'd make anything of myself either," my Aunt Linda confided. "She hated that I married your uncle instead of the doctor she had picked out for me, but we built a good life together on our terms." My cousin Taylor, who had always seemed to have the perfect life my mother approved of, revealed her own struggles. "I became a lawyer because it was expected, not because I loved it. Seeing what you've built by following your own path, it's inspiring." These conversations, these connections with family members, seeing me clearly perhaps for the first time, were unexpectedly healing. The validation I had sought from my mother for so long had never come, but here was recognition from others that mattered more than I had realized. As guests began to depart, thanking me rather than my mother for the hospitality, I noticed her standing alone near the Christmas tree, fingering the antique brooch I had given her, now pinned to her dress. "It was your grandmother's," she said when she saw me watching. "Not just similar to one she owned. This is actually hers. How did you find it?" "Estate sale," I explained. "I've been collecting family pieces when I can find them." Something flickered across her face. Perhaps recognition that I valued our family history in my own way, even as I built a future she hadn't envisioned. "The house looks good," she admitted finally. "You've done well with it." Coming from my mother, this qualified as effusive praise. I accepted it with a nod, not pushing for more that she wasn't ready to give. When only immediate family remained, my mother approached me in the kitchen where I was organizing leftovers. "I should apologize," she said stiffly, the words clearly difficult for her, "for what I said at dinner. It was inappropriate. Not wrong, not unkind, just inappropriate." Still, it was more acknowledgement than she had ever offered before. "Thank you," I replied simply. "I don't understand the choices you've made," she continued. "I still think law would have been more stable, more respectable. But," she paused, seeming to struggle with the next words, "I can't argue with results." It wasn't the warm maternal validation I had dreamed of as a child, but it was something, a crack in the wall of disapproval she had built between us over the years. "Will you host Christmas next year?" she asked, in what seemed like an attempt at an olive branch. "Since you own the house anyway." "I'd like that," I agreed. "But on my terms, no more dismissing my choices or my success." She nodded stiffly, not quite meeting my eyes. "We'll see you for Easter then." "Perhaps," I said, not committing. The day had been emotionally draining, and I knew that real change in our relationship would take time, if it was possible at all. "I'll let you know." After my parents and Andrew and Jessica departed, I stood alone in the grand foyer of Weston Manor, my home, reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation with my mother had been painful but necessary, lancing a wound that had festered for decades. While perfect reconciliation might never be possible, the truth was finally out, my success acknowledged, even if grudgingly. In the days that followed Christmas, I processed the confrontation and its aftermath. I had spent so many years seeking validation from my mother that I hadn't fully recognized how much I had accomplished entirely without it. The revelation of my ownership of Weston Manor hadn't magically transformed our relationship, but it had shifted the dynamic in important ways. Andrew called 3 days after Christmas, suggesting lunch just the two of us. Over sandwiches at a quiet cafe, he apologized more fully for his role in our family dynamic. "I never realized how differently Mom treated you," he admitted. "It was easier to go along with it than to question it." "It's not entirely your fault," I told him. "We were both just playing the roles we were assigned." "Still," he insisted, "I should have seen what was happening. I'd like us to be closer, to really know each other as adults." This unexpected outreach from my brother was perhaps the most positive outcome of the Christmas revelation. We made plans to meet monthly, a chance to build a relationship based on who we actually were, rather than who our mother had decided we should be. My father called once, awkward and hesitant, to say he was proud of what I'd accomplished. "Your mother and I just wanted security for you," he explained. After her parents lost everything, she's always been afraid of financial uncertainty. I understand that better now, I told him. But there are different kinds of security. I've built mine my own way. As for my mother, we established a fragile truce. Our conversations remained formal, careful, but the outright dismissal of my career ceased. She even asked questions occasionally about my properties or investment strategies, though always with a slight air of skepticism. The healing process wasn't quick or complete, but it was real. I set clear boundaries while remaining open to the possibility of a new kind of relationship based on mutual respect, if not always understanding. The most profound change, however, was within myself. For too long, I had measured my success against my mother's impossible standards, seeking a validation that never came. The Christmas confrontation had freed me from that need. My achievements were real and substantial, recognized now by others in my family, and most importantly, fully valued by me. I decided to be more open about my success moving forward, not in a boastful way, but simply as my authentic self. I expanded my investment portfolio, took on partners for larger projects, and even started a small foundation to help young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds navigate the business world. When people ask me now about family support in my career, I'm honest. I built this despite discouragement, not because of encouragement, I tell them. And that taught me to trust my own judgment to find validation from within rather than from others. This past Christmas, 1 year after the revelation, I hosted the family gathering at Weston Manor again, this time openly as the owner. My mother attended, still reserved, but making visible efforts to acknowledge my accomplishments. We may never have the warm, close relationship I dreamed of as a child, but we have found a way forward based on truth rather than pretense. The greatest gift I gave myself wasn't Weston Manor or financial success, but freedom from seeking approval I may never fully receive. Living authentically and succeeding on my own terms has been the sweetest revenge against all the doubts, especially my own. Have you ever had a moment when someone who doubted you finally had to acknowledge your success? Share your story in the comments below. And if you're still working toward that moment of vindication, don't give up. Subscribe to hear more stories of triumph over family judgment. And remember that sometimes the most important validation comes from within. Thank you for listening, and may your own path to success be guided by your authentic self, not by the limitations others try to place on you.